Hello and welcome. Can Pakistan hold it together as it tries to stop the Taliban from expanding its influence and advancing on major cities? Pakistan is now a country the world associates with political instability and social unrest, on top of a history of military coups. The government's now facing a critical test for its survival. On Monday, the army said that dozens of militants had been killed in clashes in the Swat Valley and South Waziristan tribal region over the past 24 hours, as part of Pakistan's expanded campaign against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Pakistan's Defence Secretary believes the army will be able to clear out the remaining militant strongholds in the valley within the next 2 to 3 days. Well, the Swat offensive has earned praise from America, as large areas of the region have been regained from an estimated 4,000 militants. But the government's action has come with a heavy price for civilians, and a string of bomb attacks occurred across Pakistan as Taliban leaders vowed to avenge their defeated forces. The fighting has forced the evacuation of up to 3 million people, with many in camps that are struggling to cope with the influx. President Asif Ali Zardari has just ordered the immediate release of $6 million in emergency relief to help the refugees. Well, the world's closely watching the situation in the nuclear-capable Pakistan, and as the military continues to fight the Taliban, we ask, what does Pakistan have to do to regain full control of the country? Remember, you can join the conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE, enter the chat room and take part. Of course, we welcome your phone calls on the show as well. My guests today both have a unique insight on the situation in Pakistan. From Princeton in New Jersey is Zia Mian, who directs the Project on Peace and Security in South Asia at the Program on Science and Global Security at Princeton University. Dr. Mian is also Associate Editor of Science and Global Security magazine. And here in the studio with me is Nicholas Schmidl, the fellow at the New America Foundation, who reported for 2 years from Pakistan for various publications and wrote extensively about his experiences in his new book, To Live or to Perish Forever, 2 Tumultuous Years in Pakistan, which was released earlier this month. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us on.
Hello.
Nicholas, if I can start with you actually on the issue of the Taliban. You had some fairly up close and personal contact with the Taliban at fairly top levels. Now, from what you saw and what you see going on right now, how much of a threat do you believe the Taliban to be realistically to the Pakistani government and to the integrity of Pakistan as a country?
Well, I think the Taliban have already succeeded in severing off territories for themselves. And so right now what we've seen in Swat is that the Taliban, the army has largely defeated the Taliban in Swat, and yet the Taliban left before the army was there to defeat them. So there was some resistance, but when talking to people that were in the city of Mingora, locals in the city of Mingora, they're reporting that the Taliban left days ago. And what I think what we saw today, for instance, with this abduction of 300 people in North Waziristan, is a sign of what the Taliban's response will be now in the coming weeks. So I think, like I said, they have already threatened the integrity of the state. The question is, how will combating them affect that?
And do you believe Western fears, because of course the way it's reported in the West creates a sense of fear about what's going on there, do you believe those are sort of blown out of proportion, or are they fairly accurate reports on the way the Taliban has been advancing?
Well, the Taliban has been advancing significantly, and particularly last month when they advanced from Swat into the Bunair district and moved to within 60 miles of Islamabad, and everyone was kind of going crazy all over the world. It was justified, that concern, and yet I think that we have misunderstood or sort of underestimated the Pakistani army's resolve in actually fighting them. And as they moved to within 60 miles, first you saw a sea change of public opinion, and then the army was able to use that public opinion and public support to be able to really launch a concerted counterinsurgency against the Taliban.
Well, Dr. Zia Mian, it's good to have you with us as well, sir. And I guess one of the big questions being asked right now is the Pakistan going to get its hands on the Taliban, going to get its hands on Pakistan's nuclear weapons?
That's very unlikely. Pakistan has committed a huge effort to securing its nuclear weapons for many, many years, precisely because they thought that those weapons might be attacked by India and perhaps others at some stage. And so there are thousands of soldiers whose only job is to defend Pakistan's nuclear weapons facilities and the weapons themselves. So it's hard to imagine how the Taliban might get their hands on them.
But I wonder if Pakistan starts to fragment the way it seems to be, whether or not there is some risk that the overall rule of law might collapse a fair amount. I know Nicholas doesn't specifically believe that Pakistan is destined to become a failed state or is a failed state, as some report. I've read his articles and so on. But yourself, how do you see the integrity of Pakistan holding up?
Well, Pakistan is under threat from many directions, and it's not just the Taliban that we have to worry about. There is a long simmering insurgency in the province of Balochistan, Pakistan's largest province. There's also a lot of unhappiness in other parts of Pakistan. And so there's also concerns about the rise of radical Islamic groups separate from the Taliban in parts of the Punjab province, as well as the growing economic crisis and political crisis and the crisis of infrastructure, the lack of electricity, growing poverty. So Pakistan is under threat from many, many directions, and which one of them may actually push Pakistan over the edge is not clear. But certainly Pakistan is in a very perilous situation and moving increasingly into a zone of danger.
Nicholas, what's the appeal of the Taliban for those it manages to recruit? Because it seems to be picking up a lot of supporters. What is it about well, you've even written about the sort of next generation Taliban as well.
Right. I mean, I think that the Taliban, up until very recently, were able to cash in on support that average Pakistanis were really infatuated with the idea of the Taliban. If you ask a Pakistani, who are mostly predominantly Muslims, whether they want to live according to Sharia law, that's like asking an American whether they want to live according to the Constitution. They're going to say yes. And so therefore, they looked at the Taliban as sort of these righteous, humble Muslims who perhaps were a little bit backwards and misguided, but their hearts were in the right place. The recent advance into Bunair, I think, showed the Pakistani population, the Taliban, for what they were, which was that they had political objectives. They had a political scheme and agenda that they were trying to pursue, and that's when we started to see public opinion turn against them.
So there's an irony that the spread of Sharia law, and we're seeing it spread across a lot of those remote provinces, is not something that the people are necessarily resisting. It's more the application of the Taliban's rule of law.
Right. Well, I mean, Sharia in and of itself is welcome and still is welcome, and it's the way that the Taliban have interpreted it. People say, look, Sharia is one thing, but flogging 17-year-old girls who refuse the marriage proposal of a Talib fighter is another thing. Right. And also, the Taliban really took a step too far when they started sanctioning and saying that Islamic law sanctioned cutting the heads off of Pakistani soldiers. That's really when Pakistani started drawing the line.
Dr. Mian, what's your assessment on the support that Pakistan has managed to retain from certainly the United States and other allies in trying to fight what's going on? The British Prime Minister Gordon Brown was in Pakistan not long ago. He used the term crucible of terror, which sort of has echoes of the axis of evil, and then the US also has basically accused Pakistan of basically abdicating to the Taliban and the extremists. So how much that indicates a lack of willingness to continue supporting Pakistan?
Well, I don't think that there's a lack of willingness to support Pakistan. The problem is that it's precisely the form that support has taken in the past and continues to take today that is part of the problem. One of the reasons that the Taliban have been able to mobilize such public support over so many years, to be able to mount the kind of challenge that they have, is precisely because they were able to combine a call to Pakistani nationalism with religion by saying that it's because of American pressure on Pakistan's governments and American and British support for General Musharraf's regime, for example, that Pakistan is in the situation that it's in. And I think that the key thing that we need to see is for the international community as a community, and the United Nations and others play a more active role, rather than having the US and the UK pour vast amounts of military aid into Pakistan, strengthening an already powerful army that sees its role in Pakistan as basically being the arbiter of last resort, and its only resource really is the massive use of military force or its capacity to stage coups, and that's always been a problem for Pakistan.
Well, let's get a caller on the line from London. Mustaq is with us. Go ahead, Mustaq.
Hello.
Hi, go ahead, please.
Yes, my point is that you see that Pakistan's problems are mostly Pakistan's own making. Pakistan, you see, has been completely sold out to Americans. The Americans dictate everything. And that's why you see the Taliban and other different kinds of people have turned against Pakistan, and they're creating problems.
Okay.
So basically the problems are Pakistan's own creation.
Okay, Mustaq, thank you. I'm going to put the Nicholas, this is basically an echo of what Dr. Mian was saying just now, that the America's role has been blamed to some degree for the way people think. From your experience out in the remote areas, how unifying was that cry, the sort of anti-American cry?
Well, in fact, I think what's really salient and really important here is that over the 2 years that I spent in Pakistan, the only time that I witnessed visceral anti-Americanism up close was in Islamabad, about 2 blocks from my house, the night that President Musharraf declared a state of emergency in November. And the perception was there was no way Musharraf would have done that without U.S. backing. And I remember walking in front of the parliament and having this older middle-aged man start yelling at me and saying, you're a CIA agent, this is a CIA plot. And for the first time I thought, you could see the anti-Americanism bubbling up, not necessarily in the tribal areas. That was something different almost, but you could see it in the middle class and from civil society. And that, I think, has been the most disturbing development that we've seen in the past several years.
Hussein's in Nigeria with a question as well. Hussein, what would you like to ask?
My question is, there are 3 points which are major, which are critically we are missing over here. Number one, who are these people, Taliban fighting in Afghanistan? The Taliban fighting inside Afghanistan, how they are supplied with the weapons? If on the other side of the border the USA Army is there, how they are sustaining it for so long in Waziristan and so on. Number two, why the perspective in this SWAT there was a mass weapons were found, and the weapons were in fact was USA origin, Indian origin, and Russian origin. So why are we missing out this fact?
Okay.
This
and the number 3?
Pakistani is a ploy. Number 3, for a Pakistani, this whole thing is the Taliban. Taliban are the ones who are fighting in Afghanistan. The guys who are fighting in Pakistan are not Taliban. They can be Indian backed, they can be USA backed, only to create an atmosphere inside Pakistan.
Hussein, let me put this. Hussein, just because we're short on time, let me put this to Dr. Ziamian. How much confusion is there about who is actually specifically Taliban? The labeling is there's use of the term labeling, and also Al Qaeda. I mean, people are still confused, largely outside the area of what the connection is between Al Qaeda and the Taliban, and how misused is that label, perhaps?
Well, it's important to remember the Taliban are self-labeling. They have actually declared themselves to be a national organization called the Tehrik-e-Taliban-e-Pakistan, the Taliban movement of Pakistan. And so they've rallied themselves under a flag that they have chosen to fly. And so I think the question of who is Taliban is answered by the question of who has taken the side of the Taliban. It's not other people labeling as Taliban. And the Pakistani Taliban have modeled themselves explicitly and accepted the authority in one way of the Afghan Taliban movement, which they see as a model for how a radical Islamist armed movement can actually take over power in a state. They want to do in Pakistan what the Taliban brothers did in Afghanistan. And so I think that this is completely mistaken to assume that this is either an Indian conspiracy or an American conspiracy. These are Pakistanis who have taken up arms against their own state for an explicitly ideological agenda.
Okay. Gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to take just pause as we take a short break here. As we pause, let me remind you, you can join the conversation with your questions and comments by logging on to livestation.com and entering the chat room. There's a debate taking place there right now, as you'll see on screen. We're also taking a poll in the chat room where we're asking, is there a real danger of militants gaining control of Pakistan's nuclear arsenal? Let us know what you think of that question. We'll be right back.